morning everyone and happy Wednesday. Here we are for our weekly check-in with you about anything to do with books, writing, publishing. My name is Blaise Van Heck from Busybird Publishing and...
I'm Liz Gamanis.
Yes, so as we said last week, we're going to talk about design because anyone can self-publish. You don't actually even need to go through a business like us. But what we find is that people they're not very good technically on the computer, or they don't have InDesign, which is the industry standard for layout, or they hire someone who doesn't really understand the way a book is laid out.
Yeah, it's amazing that people have probably been looking at books their whole life and they still don't know the way a book should look inside or outside. And we get some really bizarre drafts of layouts that we just sort of throw our hands up in the air and wonder what was that designer thinking.
Yeah, so I thought we could talk about a few books today, Les. So this, can I have this? So this is Walking Back Home by Margaret Caffin. It's about her Camino walk. It's a couple of years old now. And actually, did you know that Margaret's gone to live in Spain for a few months? Lucky thing. So this is Margaret's book about her first walk, actually, to Santiago, her Camino walk. Now, the reason why I wanted to show you this, aside from it being a great book for anyone who is a traveller and who has been thinking about doing the walk, obviously travel stories quite often have great photos and they don't look as good in black and white. So Margaret opted for some colour images in the middle. Okay, so that is an option for you. There's a few pages there. It's sort of like an insert in the middle because they look real, especially something like that where there's a red coat. It looks much more interesting in colour. But the thing to think about in this case, Les, is that's going to cost you more to print. Okay, a lot of people don't think about that. They think, I want my whole book in colour, it's going to have, colour headings and all sorts of things. But as soon as you have any colour in a book, the whole book is considered as colour. And
So what you're saying too is you can't just selectively do colour without an inset.
No, some printers will do it, but it won't be as good quality. So by doing it in insert, just paying for colour in that insert. If you were to do the whole book in colour, you're probably going to, add another 40-50% in the price, depending on where you go. So that was a really good choice. Another thing that you can do if you've got a couple of colour photos and you can't afford to do the insert, you could actually print in colour on the inside of the cover. Because you have that. It will cost a little bit more, but not as much as an insert. In terms of other sort of, design elements, for instance, we've put some footprints in here, which kind of goes with the theme of walking. Kev has done this cover, which I think is awesome. If you look at it, it looks like Margaret is walking on the Camino, but in actual fact, the photo was taken in the studio because obviously Margaret was walking and she can't take a photo of herself like that.
What if she brought a dog who would take pictures?
And then Kev laid it over the top of one of her awesome pictures from the Camino. And I would say you can't tell the difference when you look at it.
Well, you can't.
It's really good.
Unless you were... No, you weren't still.
Even when you know, you can't tell.
No.
Now, so this is a standard C format book, which most books in bookshops are. They're usually that or sort of one size down, which is like a B or a B+. Another thing to think about when you've got images is it's harder when you go smaller to make them look interesting. So obviously this is a little pocket book. Do You Believe in Miracles by Benetta Wayman. So this is kind of like a little pocket book. It's Benetta, I hope I pronounced it correctly, is a hypnotherapist. So this is just a little book about hypnotherapy and how she works. And obviously, if you don't have a lot of words, you don't want to put it into something that size because then it will end up, 10 pages or something and really skinny. So she's gone for a smaller book. I don't know if she is planning to do a series, but she could do a little series. What are we going to do? You're going to hold it up?
Sure, hold up so you could...
So some things to think about in terms of the layout in a little smaller book is the size of the font. If you make the font too big, it looks really strange on the page. So it's about balance between fonts and the space you have. You also wouldn't have as wide a margin because that will look strange. It's hard to... Do you want me to hold one? What else would you say? In terms of having images, has this actually got any images?
No. The really important thing with images is too many people think in squares.
Yes.
So what happens... Can I take that back?
Yeah.
Or in landscape. So what happens is we get an image that is that shape, and it now has to fit into a book that shape.
Yep.
And it doesn't really fit. It looks a little bit odd on the page at times, and if you shrink it down, you're losing some of the detail. Obviously, you can flip it around, but people then have to turn the book over to look at it properly.
Yep.
So if you're going to use images, you also need to consider ahead of time what size your book's going to be and how that image is going to fit. Particularly with square images, we don't have anything square, do we, on us?
No.
You know, you get a square image which is half that size. Again, it sort of occupies half the page.
Yeah. And the other thing is too, when people are typing up their book, they're on a A4 page usually, because that's the default in Word. And so when they might actually be typing and inputting photos in so that they can orientate themselves around their story. But then when that translates into a book, quite often the photos either don't fit or they might not fit where the text is in terms of wrapping around.
Yep.
So sometimes that can be a little bit hard for a designer to work out
And
how
similarly,
they go.
when people use tables.
Yep.
People use tables with 8 rows. Looks great in Word on the page it's that big, but now it has to be shrunk down to this size, and what you do is you need to make the text so small to fit in those columns. So it's all about thinking about what size your book is ultimately going to be.
Yep.
And working toward that as your template.
Now, when it comes to printing, you can actually do just about anything. But if you try and stick to sort of the more standard sizes, it's going to be better money-wise. But this book, for instance, so this is about yoga, a particular style of yoga by Shimmy. And Shimmy has a lot of yoga poses. So if you have a lot of images, you want a sort of bigger page. This is not quite A4, I don't think.
No, it was not. Because we did a last minute change to fit something.
So obviously,
it
actually looks good when you have everything, spread across the page. If you were to do that in that size book, the C size, you'd either have to have really tiny images or not as many on a page. So that's something to think about.
The other thing too is a lot of people ask us how big is the book going to be after we lay it out. I don't know.
You can also, 10,000 words might only be a little pocket book, but it depends on how many images you've got and what sort of design elements you have.
So it'll depend on the size of the font, the margins, the leading, which is the vertical spacing between lines, how spacious that is, because it varies. So there's all these variables that will go into the design and affect how long it'll be, and we cannot predict how long it will be before we've done it. Similarly with stuff like images, we don't know how much space they're going to occupy. So we can give people a ballpark figure, or we can even work to a ballpark figure by playing around with size and stuff like that, but we can't give definite answers.
Even something like how many chapters there are. If you've got 30 chapters and you always want to start on the right-hand side, which is usually what you do, in non-fiction anyway, obviously there are going to be lots of white space where something finishes on the...
stuff like that.
Right.
So, that's taken up only, about a quarter of the page, not even. So there's so many intangibles that...
Just show how the next page goes after that. So then is there a blank?
Starts,
blank page.
Well, it's technically not blank, it's got...
Yep, so we've put some design elements on the blank page. You could actually even put, depending on the type of book, you could put some little inspirational quotes or a little image that goes with it. So even if you've only, some people say, I need to have 50,000 words. Even if you have 20,000 words, we can still make a substantial looking book. For instance, this one Shimmy has chosen sort of like shadow drawings for the blank spaces, just so there's not too much white space. And we've tried to make the images really uniform right through the book. What else? I don't know that this has got any. Is that no? That won't have any.
The other thing was
So this one has like some tables and things like that. Again, when people make tables in Word, obviously this is closer to an A4 page, so it wouldn't have been as hard to format. But if you're working on an A4 page and you have something that big, it's going to have trouble either have to make it smaller or things have to go over pages, and sometimes that looks a bit
going
messy.
to point that out too.
Yeah.
The text boxes.
The text box? What about that?
Nothing. I don't know why you'd point that out. No, so sometimes you get design elements like she's put little notes and she's wanted them highlighted. So again, they're affecting how much text is on the page, because you can see they're quite spacious. They're standing out in a little box of their own. So once you start throwing things like that into, they affect the flow of the text.
Yeah.
And how much space everything's going to take.
The biggest thing to think about with books is that they flow from one page to the other. Unlike, say, something like
They should.
They should, and this is what we find with other people who don't do book design but are, really good designers. Quite often they've been working on, brochures and things that are sort of, maybe 10 pages or 20 pages, and all the elements are quite separate in terms of how they're placed into the layout. Whereas with a book, we want text flow right through.
Yep.
Especially if, which we've had a case recently where someone wanted to change the size of the book.
Yep.
If you don't have that flow and you don't have styles and
show
everything
them that.
input, yep.
So those things at the top of the page,
The headers.
they're called running headers
Yep.
because they appear throughout the book. And there's a way to set those up, so you only have to set them up really once, and then they'll appear on every page.
Yep.
We recently had a book where the author wanted the size of the book changed, and her previous designer had actually manually placed that on every single page, which meant that we had to go through every single page
Yeah,
and adjust them to the new size.
And it's 280 pages,
Yep.
so it's really laborious when you want to make changes.
Whereas, if he'd set them up just that one time, all we would have had to do is move it that one time, and it would have adjusted the whole way through.
Yeah. Even if you want to change the font, like the type of font
Yep.
or the font size, if you have it all set up properly, you just make one change and it will change everything for you.
Yep.
Which is much less of a headache than having to do every single page manually.
Probably my favourite, which was a few years ago, we had a author who retained their own designer to create the cover, and with the cover, logically, when you look at a book, the front cover comes first, then you have the spine in the middle, and the back cover comes last. But in design, the back cover actually comes first. It begins on the left-hand side of the page.
And it's one piece.
Yep. So what we got from that design was the front cover was on this side. So that would actually make it like that. So when you close the book, the front cover was on the back of the book. So we had to change around. And recently we had someone who designed the cover in separate pieces.
Yep. And so that, it doesn't mean that they're not a good designer, it just means
Probably
that
means
they
they're not a
haven't-
good designer.
No, it just means that they haven't worked with books a lot, so they
I
don't
agree,
understand
they're not
the
a good
process.
designer. They're not a good book designer.
Yeah, they just don't understand how, even someone, if you read books a lot, then you actually understand,
Or if you've happened to just pick one up in your life somewhere and looked at it and said, oh, that's what a book looks like.
and probably a lot of people don't realise that a new section, like a new chapter, starts on the right side. And they may not even know that the right side is always an odd number.
Number of page, yep.
Yeah? So, because if you think about it, the first page is always on the right, so that's number 1. So after that, everything is odd on the right side. And that people get that wrong too. What else should we think about? In terms of contents, try and keep it simple. We have a lot of people who make the contents really complicated and have, a whole lot of different, lots of information in their contents, which probably doesn't need to be there.
It's also about consistency. So with Margaret, chapter 2, chapter title, quote. Chapter 3, number, title, quote. Chapter 4, number, title, quote. So it's consistent the whole way through. If one of those things was suddenly missing, you would just think, they've forgotten it.
As a reader, you feel like it's a mistake, don't you? Even if it wasn't.
It's like, oh, they left something out here. It's not a case of, oh, well, the author decided to do it differently here. It's not avant-garde, it just seems like someone has totally forgotten to put something in.
I think too, one thing to think about in terms of reading a book, it's actually a visual experience as well as a tactile one. And so it's really good to, while you don't want to bang the reader over the head with things, in terms of the visuals, you want to help them negotiate their way through a book, especially non-fiction. So for instance, you might have a separate title page for a part to the book. And then you go, okay, that's part 1, and then you go through the chapters, and then there'll be part 2, 3. Are we working?
Yeah, my phone just rang.
Oh, we didn't hear it. What else is there that we need to think about? Little things like, are you going to have, well, these are all gloss, but will you have gloss or matte finish? Another thing that a lot of people come to us and say, I want, embossing on the lettering, that's where you raise it, and you might do it in a foil like a gold or a silver, or they might want a ribbon, so that you can mark the pages, or they might want gloss on the front, matte on the back, lots of different things, and you can get all of those things, but the return on your investment is going to dramatically decrease, because just getting embossing, for instance, might add $1 or so per book, and that adds up if you're getting 500 books.
Yep.
And if you keep adding, then whatever adding costs, then whatever you're selling for, you're decreasing that profit margin. What else? Do you have a preference to gold or gloss or matte?
I like matte.
I like matte too, but gloss actually brings out colours, so it's.
No? So you like matte? Go on, sorry.
Okay. It is a personal preference. There is no right or wrong, and it does depend on the cover. If you've got a really bright photo, the gloss will bring the colours out. So if you want that actually works really well. What else?
What else is, if you want a book to look professional, it needs to be professionally laid out. InDesign is the industry standard. I'm sure Apple has something like iBooks, where they're trying to take over the world, unusually, with inferior software. But just be aware that whenever you go to a designer, they need to know books. There's a lot of different elements to books, and we have had a number of layouts that have come from designers who have no book layout experience, and we end up having to clean up whatever issues they've introduced.
Well, recently we had one that came to us where the margins were really tiny, only about 1 centimetre. Now, the issue with that is, it looks close to the edge, but depending on the printer, if they trim it too tightly, it can then look even closer, and if you've got running headers, they could actually end up right on the edge of the book.
Or be cut. And so when books are printed and cut, there's a bit of a variable as to where they cut around the margin, which is whatever you set up. But just like a printer at home, the paper does shift a little bit when it's in the printer. So there'll be minor differences depending on the printer, and if anything's too close to the edge, you risk the chance that it might be cut off. I mean, the other thing too with images, I don't think she's going to have an image. If you're using images, be sure there's not fine detail on the edges where, again, it might be cut.
Yeah, especially, any text or
so you see the caption there,
someone's face
all away from the edge.
Yeah.
Because again, we get like people who supply images and it's right against the edge of the border. Also, think about, these are all in colour obviously, but often we get images which are colour dependent, and when they go to grayscale, which is just the black and white of the book, they lose a lot of detail.
Yeah.
And
they can get really dark as well.
And what looks fine in colour often doesn't look good in grayscale. It loses a lot of its contrast, and look at that shot, which is really pretty. In grayscale, it would look terrible. That one.
Yep. Makes me want to go to Spain.
You should go.
Okay, so that's pretty much, yes, we won't show that one. That's X-rated photo. You'll have to buy the book to get it. So I think that's sort of, design 101. There's a few little, and they're just little things, but probably the main thing is to, look at the books on your bookshelf. Yep. And see, where do you want page numbers? Do you want running headers or not?
And that's a good way of working too. Of like, often, or what we do is we always just do a layout of a couple of chapters, and we'll send it back to the author and ask them what do they think.
Yep.
Do they feel it totally misses the mark and we need to start from scratch? Do they feel it's good but it needs a few tweaks, or do they feel it's fine, keep going? So we make sure the author understands the collaborative process and they have a lot of input into the way their book looks.
And that's the beauty of self-publishing, is that you have total control over the product and how it looks.
Yeah, but the one thing some authors do is they don't really have a good idea of how their book looks. They want it to look until they see how they don't want it to look.
Yeah.
So it's usually worthwhile just going to your bookshelf and just going through some books and actually looking at them and saying, yes, I like that element, can we do something like that? And having at least a rough idea.
And it doesn't really, I think this is one area of the whole book process where you don't really want to try and do anything too experimental, because when it comes to reading, books have been in this format for hundreds of years, and it works like this. I have read a book where it was this way, so you actually read it like that, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. Why haven't I thought of that? But when I read it, it was horrible because you kind of had to hold it open with two hands.
That is horrible.
And it felt like I was reading on the computer. So why change something that works, that is user friendly, and it's just about, it's a little bit of a marketing thing about how you want the book to look and feel, depending on what your book's about. But I would say don't kind of go too out there.
I was just going to say,
cost you more money too.
That's a memoir about walking on Camino. That's about doing yoga. Show that one, middle, anywhere.
Yeah.
And that is a book about hypnotherapy and the benefits of hypnotherapy. They're all vastly different topics, but books all employ the same format, which is words. That's why it's called reading, because it's words.
And we read from left
to right. Yep.
Obviously, in Asian countries, they read the other way, but they would just format their book differently.
Yep. But I was just sort of saying, there's really not a lot of scope to, you can go way out there, but it's a reading experience. When you pick up a book, the experience is to read. It's to interact with words. So
you don't want to make it harder for people
or distracting.
Yeah. Another thing to think about in terms of images, please get copyright for images. Don't just take them from the internet, or don't just take them from books. Shimmy, I know, had a photographer take all her photos.
So that's Shimmy herself.
Yeah. Margaret took her own photos, so obviously there's no copyright issues there. But we have had issues where people have done collaborative things where someone might do the illustrations and someone has done the words, and it's ended up in fights because it's like who owns the IP and who did more work and who's put in more money. And we have had a couple of clients who have ended up in court over it, which is sad because quite often they're friends, and then it costs them money.
But also, even if you take pictures, if it's of certain people or places, you may need permission to use those, and particularly if you're taking pictures of kids. So that is something to keep in mind. It's just not very easy to use, and there's a certain quality, minimum quality that they need to be, which is 300 dpi, dots per inch. With internet, generally the rule is you want low quality pictures, so pages load up quickly. Books is the other way. You want high quality images so that they print nice.
Nicely, All right, I think that's probably enough.
That's probably enough.
Lesson, yes. I want to remind people of our awesome Bali retreat in November. We've got a new date from the 1st to the 6th of November.
Second day.
Second day?
Yep.
Is that what it said?
It said a new date.
A new date, yeah. Second date of 1st to the 6th of November. It is a week where you will have Les and I to teach you about writing and publishing.
So
but
I'll have Les and I.
Yeah.
Is Sam coming?
I don't know. Is Sam coming?
Coming, Sam?
Shell wants to come. Lots of people want to come, so you have to get in quick. It is a week to work on your book. That's
Yes.
pretty awesome, isn't it? So there are 12 modules where they're going to learn some writing skills, publishing, marketing, all of that kind of stuff, but also lots of time for actual writing. So you can actually get your book written. And
You know, if they're working on a non-fiction book, it's time for factual writing.
factual writing.
Yeah.
Okay. Not actual. All right. It's all going over my head today. What else? Why else would they go to Bali?
Get a break from life.
Yeah, nice weather.
Nice.
Massage. Everyone gets a massage. Good food.
Who does the massages?
I
It's
don't
me,
know.
because I can't do it.
No. And what else? Some Bali culture.
Bali culture, sit by the pool, relax, get a break from
All of the
everyday
rooms
life.
Did you know all of their rooms have their own bath? So you may not actually see me for the whole week.
Oh, okay.
Okay, what else do we need to remind people about?
You had another book camp date, didn't you?
We do have another book camp. We just
Because
did
of the
book camp
success.
last weekend.
Sam, shout out a testimonial.
It was really, really good.
Yeah. So we had a full
Oh,
house.
you must be a writer. Really, really good.
Weekend just gone. And so we have another date for book camp.
Do you have another day for book camp?
We do.
Oh, okay.
27th and 28th of July. So, why do you think people should come to book camp?
Because it is an intense, exhaustive, fast track into writing and publishing that will answer a lot of your questions and give you focus as to where you go next, regardless of where you are in your journey, whether you just start to write a book, whether you're looking at publishing, whether you're looking at marketing.
And you know what? If people do book camp and then book into Bali, book camp is free.
Is it?
So the money can be transferred to the Bali retreat.
Oh, I didn't know
And they won't have to do as many of the learning modules, which
Yes,
will
you
give
will.
them more time for either writing or massages or sitting in the bath or in the pool or something like that.
that. Okay,
That's pretty cool.
it is pretty cool.
So, you can actually possibly get the whole weekend for free and be fast-tracked in Bali. So I think that's a pretty good deal.
That is a pretty good deal.
Yeah. Okay, so that's it from us today, unless you have anything else that I've forgotten.
No.
We'll see you next week.
See
What are
ya.
we wait on. What are
What-
we going to talk about next week?
Um,
We forgot to think about what we're going to talk about.
oh, you know, we mentioned it before.
Did we?
Yeah, we did.
Maybe we can give people some...
Maybe people should put some comments down and make
yes,
suggestions.
if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, make some comments below. But maybe next week, Les, we can talk about fiction writing and some tips around that.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yep.
We'll do that. Okay, we'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.